Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm joined by James Carey, who managed to achieve top eight at this year's UK Nationals 2025 playing Malice. So I invited James over to the channel to go over his deck profile, share his insights, and talk about the format in general. So a very warm welcome to you, James.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me on. I think this is a good opportunity to go over the deck in sort of more detail than we initially did a sort of rushed deck profile on the train homes, but I think it's a bit better to have a more relaxed one where we can talk more about some of the decisions that were made.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I saw about four or five different deck profiles on the train, like on the train back when I was on the train back from Liverpool. So it was a bit of a rush time, wasn't it? Yeah, I
It's
was
become like a trend now. People love the train deck profiles.
yeah, it's so true. I was judging the event, so I won an oversized card with a very similar Malice list that I could say what my differences were from that list from Friday. But of course, over the weekend, I was seeing a lot of Malice in top tables, seeing a lot of Prize on Mitsurugi, as I'm sure we can go through later. So yeah, do you want to give any shout outs first before we get into the profile proper?
Yeah, so shout out to everyone who let me borrow cards, which was a long list of people, but mainly Omar, who let me borrow basically half the deck. Well, the engine wise at least. Shout out to Mark Reeve from my locals who let me borrow Dominus Impulses because I'm too cheap to buy them myself. And then shout out to anyone who lent me the odd card or whatever that I forgot to bring to the venue, like the two Lingaribos, which quite important when you're playing Malice, apparently.
Yeah, I think still playing two is pretty good. Link ones, as everyone seems to know these days, are a bit broken. But yeah,
They are indeed.
we'll get into the kind of like general. How do you feel about the weekend before going into it? Like, what were your expectations like? And did you do much testing before nationals?
It's really funny because I did do quite a lot of testing before Nationals, but close to none of it was with Malice. I was actually testing pure Mitsurugi and Fiendsmith Mitsurugi mainly. I liked the way those cards play, and I like decks. I mean, as you well know, I like decks that can abuse the Fiendsmith cards, and I felt that Mitsurugi was quite good at that because you just get so many free bodies. But toward as the event got closer, I kind of thought that zooming out and seeing the non-engine that people were choosing to play, people main decking Perulia, people main decking Droll, Mistaken Arrest was a very popular side deck card. It just felt like Mitsurugi variants were somehow being even like way more targeted than Malice was. And my sort of idea behind choosing Malice was that I thought I'd rather deal with three copies of Lancia coming from the side deck than deal with three copies of Droll and three copies of Perulia all being in the main deck. And I think the amount of times I got Perulia'd and Drolled game one throughout the weekend when Malice doesn't really care too much about those cards, I feel like it really vindicated my decision.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, even with Fulos in the main, there is arguments that that ends Malice turns, and it is in some cases a floodgate in a very similar way to Lancia post side. But I found myself whenever I got Fulos just being able to make Crypta and it never really mattering because the minimal Malice end boards are as good as the minimal Mitsurugi end boards. Of course, if they get to prayers and get to have a Regeki that's solid, but everyone's playing through at least one Regeki in the format because they've got to deal with Amin and Murakamo. So yeah, I think is a very good justification. Yeah. Had you played
Yeah,
Mats like much before the event as well? Had you played other major events?
I played a lot of Malice last format before Alan. I was playing, well, I tried both Pure Malice and Fiendsmith Malice. As you know, we've had many debates about Fiendsmith cards in the deck or not. Um, but I hadn't actually played the deck, with the exception of playing a little bit on DB and stuff post the Allen support. I knew that the support was really broken. I know that the Ignister cards help playing through Lancia and March Hare is basically custom, but I hadn't done any serious testing with the deck post Allen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I played the Brotherhood regional that was 256 players odds, and I think I came in the I think like 30th, like in the X2 bracket. Sadly, one person that I beat who went X2 eventually, like came in top 16, and I was playing a pretty stripped back basic list with just the good hand traps, and then same deal for Darksphere regional. That was before Allen, which is shifter format. I think my profile just
Mm.
started with like I played this deck and then just showed three shifter. And then I won an OTS championship with this again, like a very similar hand trap based list. But yeah, why don't we hop into the deck profile now and let's talk about the choices and things that are debatable and things that aren't.
Yeah, so I think when it comes down to the engine, so the deck is 20 engine, 20 non-engine, which is really satisfying. I think when it comes to the engine, the only really debatable point, because obviously there's going to be two mouse, two rabbit. I think three hair is pretty much standard at this point. Three backup on one wizard. I think the only talking is I chose to play two Chessy Cat instead of three, where I know a lot of people are playing three to sort of max out on consistency. My logic with this was just that I know that opening Chessy with another Malice name is fine. Like it's not like you have two normal summons then, because you can normal summon the Chessy and still use it to get the other one out of hand. However, I want there's still going to be cards like Imperm and Veiler running around, even though they're way less popular. And opening Chessy plus Rabbit into a Veiler or Imperm is quite bad. So I didn't really want that to happen. I wanted to draw one of these six and then one of either Hare, Backup, or Abystial, as opposed to drawing Chessy with another Malice name. So I decided that six normal summons was enough. And I didn't I only bricked one game over the whole weekend, having played 18 rounds. So I think that the third Chessy Cat is an option, but I don't think it's mandatory.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the other lists I saw from Top Cut were playing three, but the time that I played three was playing Allure plus Shifter. And now that Draw's in the format and you want to actually search at least once or twice with this deck, playing Allure is a bit cap. It's only if you don't have the don't have the Charmies on your person. So you just play like Allure as a kind of flex spot to unbrick yourself. But apart from that, the idea of you need to see a Malice name, that is true. But I think that considering the five normal summons in a 40 card deck maths has been the case for a long, long time, six is basically fine for normal summon counts. And I agree about if you look
Yeah,
at your hand and you've got these two normal summons, I tend to go for Chessy normal summon first if it's the case that that gets stopped and the stronger normal summon is saved for the next time you're trying to play. If you do get impermed and imperm would kill your turn, if that makes sense. So normal summoning it is still fine, but I do think that getting the draw two off later in the turn tends to be better. So yeah, I tend to agree. And I heard you discussing like the potential tech of playing like three wizard, one backup, which I think
Hmm.
is I haven't thought about it much, but seems crazy like at first glance. But what was the reasoning for that like potential change?
Yeah, so that's an idea I had, but I kind of lacked the conviction to do it because, like I said, I didn't really test the deck before the event, and I saw everyone's playing three backup and one wizard, which in a vacuum makes sense, right? Because backup, it can also search the Malice name, so it can be a pseudo starter. It's an extra body as opposed to just drawing wizard. But I think there are downsides to backup, which a lot of people don't seem to sort of acknowledge very often, which is that two cards which are in basically everyone's main deck at the moment is Droll and Perulia. And backup plays quite hard into both. Because if you search it with Wicked or I Meet You and get Drolled, you can't use it to get Wizard. It's an extra body and nothing else. And you're giving them an extra draw off Perulia if you have Wizard backup. So I was considering playing one backup, just have as a Wicked search and post side I Meet You sometimes. And three Wizard because opening a Malice name plus Wizard still lets you play through multiple hand traps. Um, so, but it's something that I hadn't really tested, and everyone else was playing three backup, so I decided to play three backup, and it felt okay. But I think a lot of situations, Wizard would basically have been the same thing. And then there were even I think two times during the event where I had like a Malice name on board, a backup in hand as the only card in hand. And when it's the only card in hand, it loses a lot of value because you can't search the wizard, discard another card, and have it as an extender. So in those cases, you would actually rather it was wizard. Yeah, so I kind of just lacked the conviction to play three wizard, one backup because everyone else was playing three backup. I just sort of went with it. But I do think if I'd had more time to test, I think three wizards might in the long term have turned out to be correct. I think the logic behind it is pretty sound, but I just lacked the sort of belief, so I was a sheep and went with what everyone else was doing.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think you could even go for middle ground and go for like 2-2 or potentially because we were seeing lists from the OCG earlier on in this format that were playing a second wizard in the side, and everyone was like, "That's crazy talk. That doesn't make any sense." But it's kind of more convincing in hindsight. And also, you mentioned Prulia. Whenever I get Prulia'd, I always, of course, am Malice player and magic the field spell to my hand. So you just start off with that, but then I forget that they resolved it, and then just go through a combo and then search back up, summon it, and I'm like, wait. Why you draw a card? Why game bug? Why you draw a card? Which is annoying. Um,
Yeah, I definitely had that during the event as well.
yeah, and what was main deck GWC like? You're behind and lost, just like me.
I'm so behind and lost. I decided to main deck GWC just because I didn't have time before the event to sort of learn any of the combos. I mean, I can freestyle a lot of the MTP combos, I think, and honestly, I wouldn't say GWC in the main won me game ones. Like I think I would have been fine without it, but I decided to play it as kind of a comfort blanket because I've been every time I've played the deck before, GWC has been in the main. I think that there are even some cases where in grind games, the life gain kind of comes in clutch. If like Mitsu clear your board and hit you with a hubba and a detonator and whatever, and all of a sudden your life point's low, you can't afford to pay for all your things, the life point gain can come in clutch. So I decided to keep it in there just as sort of comfort security. Um, and I didn't brick on it uh, too often, so I think it was fine. But there's definitely a case to be made for cutting it. I think, like I said, I think I could have got away without GWC.
Yeah, I tend to agree about the life point gain thing because if your hair happens to be negated for whatever reason, just having an extra way to get back to the link monsters that are in the graveyard already, obviously Binder in ideal situations with the trap is solid. And the fact that once you go through your first turn, getting to both traps in a combo is just extra insulation against random things that might happen to you in turn two. So yeah, it makes sense. I don't think we have to discuss the six times Charmies plus Ash thing much. I've seen some folks siding Ash Blossom as a go first card to deal with Charmies, but I think that if you happen to go first in game one, then it's there as well. I guess the things that are more up for discussion are the Bull Drake, no Imperm, and main deck talents and called by. So what were those choices like for you?
Yeah, so looking at the non-engine as a whole, I kind of disagree a bit with what you said about the Charmies in particular. I think that Fua is pretty mandatory, um, because it's basically good against everything. But I think that main decking six Charmies does have its downsides, especially when I'm not playing Almirage, which means that like a Charmy plus backup doesn't combo um, as well as it would if I was playing Almirage. I went with playing Perulia because I expected there to be a ton of Mitsurizio at the event, and I was right about that. I think Mitsurizio was basically half my matchups over the weekend. And Perulia was okay, but I wouldn't say it was like unbelievably good or anything. I think Ash in the main deck I really wanted there just to be able to Ash Charmy's game one, like you said. Um, and I think Droll is basically the best hand trap of the format into the Mitsu variants. So I think that Fua, Droll, and Ash were the mandatory ones. The rest of the non-engine, there could be some changes, I think. I'll talk about talents and call by first, I think, because these two, I can't believe that not everyone has both of these in their deck. I think these cards are such blowouts. Um, call by loses a lot of its value going second, of course, but even going second, if you're going second to Mitsu and they like prayers, tribute Murakumo, and you chain call by on that Murakumo, that's incredibly high impact. You can still call by some hand traps going second, so it's always going to get at least a little bit of value, even if it's not incredible. And going first, it's just such a blowout. Being able to call by, the Charmies, etc. Um, and I think Talents is just basically one of the best cards in the game. This card has been at the maximum number of copies permitted by the ban list in every single one of my decks since I started playing, basically. I think this card is crazy good, both going first and second, and it won me so many games over the weekend. So I'm just surprised that not everyone's playing it.
It's funny because as a judge, I saw a lot of talents to look at hand resolving, and I was like, I'm seeing this way too much for it being a one of card. Like, are some lists cheating a
Mhm.
little bit. But I've begun to main deck called by and side deck talents because called by I'm treating like a fourth copy of Impulse, as in the best card to deal with the Mitsu engine in general, going second. So it's similar sense. And then of course you can chain called by not Impulse to when they activate prayers, so they can never even activate the Ame and stuff like that. So I agree with
Yeah.
that. I was playing just Bestial, Magnamut, and Druis and no Ball Drake because I wanted to have space for imperms. So why did you cut imperm? What was the reasoning for that?
It basically just comes down to the fact that I thought Imperm was too low. It just wasn't high impact enough. I mean, the Ryzial variants now, they Duo Drive is no longer a choke point because of the existence of Star Ryzial. So if you imperm the Duo Drive, like if they start with X and they go X for sword for Duo, and then you imperm the Duo, then they just normal summon Ice, special star. They get to cross anyway, and your imperm's basically done nothing. Going second, imperm, if you like hold it and imperm a detonator, that can be all right if they don't have Eclipse Twins under it. But even in that scenario where they don't have Eclipse set up, you're still just dealing with the detonator. You still have to deal with all the Mitsu stuff. You still have to deal with cross negate, the other rank four they put up. Some decks were playing IP. Like Imperm just felt so lackluster in those scenarios. Same thing against Malice. If they normal Dormouse White Rabbit, you Imperm it, and then they make Lingeribo and show you a backup at Ignister, the Imperm's done nothing. Um, it's awful against some of the rogue decks. Like two decks I was quite scared of for the weekend were Mermail and Memento. And Mermail sends for cost and gets value off it, so Imperm loses half its value there. And Memento have 9 quick play spells to dodge it. So I just thought that Imperm, even if it resolved properly, it wasn't high impact enough, and I didn't consider it worth playing.
Yeah, I think the only situation where my imperm was really impactful was in a match against Mitsu Pure, where I held it for their turn and impermed the IP because the IP in Dynamondo gives them an extra way to get back to the army in the graveyards. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I tend to agree. It's just to be able to make Impulse destroy stuff. But the fact that Impulse you're just holding for Mitsu Ritual Spell means the destruction effect doesn't do anything anyway. So yeah,
Yeah,
understandable.
I think
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess.
the impulse imperm interaction is quite overstated, I think, because the amount of times that you actually open imperm and impulse in your hand together and specifically want to use imperm first is so rare that I think it's almost a non-factor when you're considering whether to play imperm or not. Like impulse is broken either way. I don't think it should be a deciding factor on whether you play or don't play imperm.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Moving on to the extra deck then, I suppose. You mentioned Almirage before, and I've kept Almirage in because some hands I see a field spell and a normal summon Dormouse, and I think if my field spell resolves and I go full combo, I don't need normal summon for anything, so I might as well normal summon a dead Charmy instead to make Almirage. And then of course the normal summon hand trap plus backup line being real is another reason that I have chosen to keep it. So I think that the only difference between my extra deck and yours in recent times is swapping out Haggard for Almirage. But yeah, I mean, to discuss those things, the flex spots you could say are the Allied Code, Link 5, the Haggards, I guess the Dark, even the SB these days. So what are your thoughts on those flex spots and how they came up?
Yeah, I think the only card in the extra deck that I didn't summon over the course of the weekend was SP. So I think based on that alone, I think SP could be replaced with something else. I didn't feel comfortable entering an event without it because I think that it's so flexible and versatile of a card, and it helps do things like outing a floodgate sometimes, or even going second into Mitsu if you like clear the board and then make an SP to banish the Kusanagi from their graveyard to kill their follow-up, it can be good. That didn't come up over the course of the event, so I would say SP is cuttable, but I think it's a nice to have. Um, I did miss Almirage one time, but I think one time in 18 rounds is enough that I was kind of okay without having it. Everything else in the extra deck came up at least once, I think. Even though, honestly, before I entered the event, I'd never read Cyberse Wicckid, so I learned what it did during the event.
That is a wild statement. The fact that it's also one of the best cards in the format just because of the destruction protection is also
I
crazy.
I knew about the protection effect. I didn't know how the search effect worked until like round three.
That is wild. I don't know what to say. What was your like? What was the end board you were trying to go for in general? Like, were you going for Wicked Bomber? Were you going for just like all the Malice names engraven Firewall? Were you more of an allied code enjoyer? What was the kind of what were you aiming for? And did that change over the course of the event as well?
Yeah, I think I had like three different end boards that I was going for during the event. One which I went for a lot was just Crypto Pass because I got hit with a FUA or something along those lines. So I just went for a minimal setup with Crypto Pass, MTP setup. If I went fully uninterrupted, I was going for the allied code setup basically every time. Um, and there were a few times where I would just be ending on Firewall with all three Malice links engraved and GWC and or March Hare in hand. Those were the end boards that I was going for. I basically didn't go for Bomber setup at all, except for one game. But that's mostly just because I hadn't tested it at all before the event, so I didn't really understand the Bomber setups at all. I thought that having the interruptions that I was familiar with from pre-Allen, along with a free Omni negate from Allied Code, I found that more easy to play when it comes to sequencing my disruptions than the Bomber setups.
Yeah, the way that I'm seeing the format right now is your opponent is going to hand trap you at least twice. And if they do, and you're playing Malice, and they draw you, and let's say they draw Ash you or something like that, they've got four cards for their turn, and you make Allied Code, and you've got like an Omni Negate Banish plus infinite follow-up. And that just feels like a safer option than Bomber in situations where the Bomber triggers might not get you as much value as you expect them to do so. Obviously, if you manage to achieve Wicked on board plus Bomber where it points to, so nothing gets destroyed, and then you summon a Dormouse and then summon Binder. In which case, if it's summoned to the extra monster zone, Binder points to that as well. So Bomber just keeps triggering and just destroying everything. Then it's all right. But I I do I have similar experience, which tends to it seems like both of us are just saying we were more comfortable with the easier thing to do. But that is something that is never underestimate because also playing a long event, like you say, 18 rounds is a long number of rounds, and you do not want to put yourself in situations where you're more likely to misplay just because you're tired or just because you've forgotten something. Going for the simpler option is always decent, and I've never run into problems of let's say allied gets negated and then you haven't got a way to put binder in the grave or something like those niche scenarios didn't come up for me, so I tended to appreciate having the essentially free negate the whole time. But
Yeah.
would you have made any changes, maybe like changing SP for something else?
I think SP could have easily been something else. I think the Haggard could have been the second Splash Mage. There's very little difference between the two. But I think there are some situations where you're like Cyberse locked, maybe post nib or something, and the second Splash Mage could be better than the Haggard. But I think for all intensive purposes, these are basically two copies of the same card. Um, I I think I honestly probably would have cut Bomber Dragon just because I was never going for it. So another utility link would have probably been better. But maybe if I'd had more time to sort of learn the Bomber Dragon lines or how many interruptions you can get from it, um, it's probably worth playing. I just didn't know. Honestly, Allied Code was probably cuttable as well. I was ending on it like as often as I could, but I never actually used it to negate anything during the whole event because it just got X and aggregated every single time. Um, One thing which someone mentioned to me was playing transcode, which I'm not overly familiar with the card, but apparently it stops things it points to being targeted. So I guess the idea would be you end with transcode under allied codes so that they can't aggregate it. I think that's probably an option worth considering.
Yeah, I think transcode means that co-linked monsters gain attack and also you can't target them, so it's strong. It just means that you can't summon anything at all the entire turn apart from Cyberses. So the lock is kind of very
Ah,
xenophobic, which I find can be detrimental. Double Splash Mage, I think, has been my consideration for a while. I haven't got onto it yet, but I just bought two QCRs for quite a good price off someone
oh
online.
well, you
Maybe
have
I
to
just
play them now.
maybe I just play two more. Yeah,
Before we move on, one thing I
yeah.
would say about the extra deck is I would 100% not cut Dark Charmer. I think this card was incredible for me. I think even though you'd think it's there for the mirror match, I actually think this card comes up a lot against Mitsu variants as well, because I found a lot of games where I would go first, they would Charmy me, whatever. I'd set up half board, be it Crypto Pass or whatever, and they would like mostly break it. Um, and then I'd have all my follow-ups. I'd have some bodies on field, and then it gets back to my turn, and they have the board wipe set up. And I really liked being able to start my main phase by just linking two bodies into Dark Charmer, and then playing under it, so that if they do the board wipe at any point, the Dark Charmer triggers to search a Much Hair or a backup or whatever, so that I can continue extending through the board wipe. And of course, there are times you can even take their Murakumo and board wipe them. So I think Dark Charmer is basically mandatory in this deck.
Yeah, that's a really good insight, I think. I haven't been summoning it at all lately just because I've been able to push through the ball web in different ways. But I think that knowing the option is there to start your turn with that is very, very good as a kind of first main phase action. Yeah, nice one. Happy to move on to side deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the one thing we don't talk about is last year, of course, there was a very small period where the Fiend Smith Malice variant before Alan was running around and actually just playing Meows was better than playing Lancia because it hit both engines and whatever their hand was, they'd always play into Meows and not Lancia. But these days it's just you just got to play it. You got a
Yeah.
shotgun at my phase. I've still got opponents who are not who are just still managing to get away with playing it in the main phase, which means that they are playing into March Air. And it's very annoying to lose to the incorrect play when your one player's Gold Sark, they wait for main phase, you Gold Sark, they Lancia, and you lose. But like obviously normally you just got a shotgun air. So I think that our sides are more similar than others, but quite different also. I'd be playing two thrust with Harpies and just Mischief for the kind of actual thrust targets with talents in the side. But you're playing the two extra traps I Meet You for consistency and also Iggy's Encore. You've discussed Encore to me a bit, and I obviously know what the appeal of it is with Castell and Featherstorm, and the only like it being one of the only cards that deals with that in the draw phase. But yeah, why don't you run through the other options and maybe discuss some things that you were thinking of playing that didn't feel as impactful to you?
Yeah, so you basically covered Encore, but Encore was basically I wanted a detonator out, and I think Encore was the best one because A, it doesn't require any extra deck commitment like Metal Tronus or Ultimate Slayer do, but then also, like you said, it has the dual functionality of outing the Featherstorm lock. If you because basically the game plan against Erasial variants is to hit them with a Charmy or a Droll so they go detonator pass, and then draw an Encore or a Slayer or whatever to deal with it, and then kill them. And Encore was just the best at doing that, I think. Um, Especially since I was also siding in the thrusts going second in basically every single matchup. And if you encore the detonator and they bring back the sword and use the effect, then all of a sudden your thrust is live. So I think that encore was definitely the right decision when it comes to a detonator out overall. Um, I Meet You is something that's become really popular, and I think it's just good to have for consistency and for extending through Lancia. Um, as for Thrust, I think, yeah, Thrust was basically in my deck at 3 copies every single game post side, whether I was going first or second. Because I play 3 traps, which I think cover all the matchups for going first, I always had 3 in going first. And going second, there's not a lot of spell and trap negation going around right now, other than Malice making allied codes sometimes. So I going second, you can just thrust for blowouts like Duster or Talents, which I think they're way better going second than people give them credit for. Um, Especially like I said, there's some interactions with Encore. So I think Thrust was very good, and it can also search engine because you can add like a Gold Sark. And yeah, I think one of the changes I would have made to the deck was probably playing Thrust in the main deck, honestly, because you even have a good, I'm not going to say in engine, but you even have a good target set going first in Dominus Impulse. So I think Thrust would probably be worthy of a main deck slot. It was definitely the best card in my deck over the weekend.
That's really interesting. I haven't been playing it at all in the main deck for a long time. I think I was when I was playing Mana Striker, I played it then, and it was crazy. But yeah, I mean, how did the traps go for you? I was playing Gnomes, and it's funny that Gnomes is live whatever you do because you could discard it off back up and it's still live in the graveyard. But I cut the other traps just because I wanted Solemn Strikes instead as a very kind of catch-all coverage. But yeah, did you use Simul or DDG?
Yeah, long story short, the answer to that is no. Um, so yeah, Gnomes was very, very good for me. I played against a lot of Mitsurai and every time. I actually hard opened it quite a few times post side going first. But I think the appeal of Gnomes is that it keeps them under it for 2 turns. So even if they have, two Lanciers, drawing one thrust in your hand kind of trades for two Lanciers because you can just Gnomes them in back-to-back turns. The theory behind the other two traps was that DDG was there for the rogue matchups. Like I mentioned earlier, I was quite scared of Memento and Mermail, and this card is just such a blowout against both of them. And Simul Archfiends was basically entirely for the mirror match. And the idea behind it was that I didn't like Sanctum because every Malice list is going to have 3 Ash and 3 Impulse, so 3 outs to Sanctum, and they just don't have a way to stop Simul Archfiends. And if you set up anything and flip Simul Archfiends on them, they're not ending the game through that, and then your follow-up will be good enough. So that was the sort of theory behind them, but they neither of these came up over the weekend. But yeah, Gnomes was very, very good.
Yeah, did you consider mistaken arrest or other things that you could use as a kind of lingering floodgate? Because I personally have not played arrest, considering that there are things you want to do in searching in their turn with ransom or on your turn to keep going with MTP. But did that come up as a consideration for you?
Yeah, Mistaken Arrest was I was convinced in the week or so leading up to the event that I was going to play Mistaken Arrest, but I think there were some issues with it in that it's such an insane blowout against Ryziel and Mitsu variants, but it doesn't cover the mirror match at all. So if you're siding 3 cards for going first, and they're basically I'm not going to say completely useless, but let's say they're lackluster against one of the top 2 decks in the format. I don't think that's good enough. I think you want your going first cards. If you're allocating that much side deck space to them, I think you want them to be more flexible than that. So Solemns would be a decent example. Um, but I didn't like Solemns because I actually feel like they're really good if you're backing up a board, but if you get fully turn skipped by like a Lancia, um, you want to be able to turn skip them back. And a Solemn Strike just simply isn't going to do that. Whereas Thrust for Gnomes or Simul Archfiends will do that. So I really liked the Thrust package because I think it accomplishes that really well. And it just works really nicely with siding patterns. Because going first, you just take out the 6 Charmies, you put in 3 Thrusts, 2 I Meet You, and one of the Thrust targets, and you call it a day. And so I think that made siding a lot easier, and I think it accomplished a lot more of what I wanted from a going first side deck package than playing something like a Rest or a Solemn.
Yeah, I think back to the kind of note about long events, simple patterns being a very important thing to consider. I think that just having a 6 side slot for the Charmies is something that's really good. I never actually work out my maths for big events normally. I just write down literally all the matchups and think what's coming out, what's going in, which is way too intensive. And you much rather have it in a more kind of simple, understandable, and digestible way. So that makes sense. Yeah, I think the reasoning is really solid for everything. And like I say, the differences between our two lists, as they are now, are quite minimal. The main deck is extremely similar. I'm just playing no board trick, no talents, and imperm, and then cutting one other card somewhere else, I guess. But playing two Chessy like you. And then my side's got Lancia. Oh yeah, Meows. What was the reasoning for not playing Meows?
I just thought that what I had in the main, in plus Lanciers plus Thrust, was enough to deal with Malice going second. And I didn't really think I needed Meows for anything else. So I thought that all the other cards on the side were higher value, basically.
Yeah, now that we're Alliance Insight, the first core set in a while that hasn't got a Charmy is quite sad
Mhm.
for the value of that set. I got 6 boxes for judging and just instantly sold them to vendors because I wasn't getting the money back. But yeah, I think we've gone through everything for the profile. Again, huge congrats to the top 8 is a really good achievement, and thanks so much for all the insights and the discussion. Any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up?
I would say there's one other thing I would consider changing about the list, which is that I would consider upping the number of Bystials. I think that 6 main deck Charmies is fine, but I don't necessarily think you need to main deck Perulia. So I would consider playing Thrust in the main or more copies of Boldrake. Um, But other than that, I think the list was extremely good. Obviously, I think the ratio of engine is pretty good, with maybe the exception of the backup versus wizard point. But I think the deck was quite well built. I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah, once again, thanks so much for coming on the channel, James, and thank you everyone for watching. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks for having me.